advice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't.
Hello, listeners. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
I'm Dungeon Master Rob, and we have a very special guest with us today. Daniel, hello.
Hello, I'm forever Dungeon Master Daniel.
We are all forever DMs over here. It's fine. We're used to it by now, but yeah, we're also forever.
Somebody messaged me asking me to take part in a charity game, and I was like, "Who's involved?" I always ask. I was like, "Who's involved?" And they were like, "This person, this person." I was like, "Cool, I'm in." And they were like, "Cool, are you down to DM?" And I was like, "Come on,
curses.
An extra
or would you like
5 hours of
or would
labor?
you like to be a player?" I'm like, "I'm gonna be a player."
Yeah, I'm gonna be a player. Right. No, at this point, if I'm gonna do anything extra, you better believe I'm gonna play and not DM anymore. Yeah,
Because I just want to play.
just want to play. How many? Sorry, Matt, to stomp over you, but how many games do you run currently, Daniel? Because I've been trying to keep up with what you're involved in, but like, what are you currently responsible for? Not to put you on the spot.
Let me think about this. I am responsible for 3 games, only 3 games.
3 games. That's a reasonable amount. Yeah.
Yeah, one of them's like a therapy game for an organization I run. Another's for the podcast, and then another is a personal game. So I got professional, creative, and home.
That's beautiful.
Hell yeah. The trifecta. Daniel, you are Dungeon Master, game designer, Canadian,
Yes.
any award-winning podcaster, and as of 2 weeks ago, a WotC module Candlekeep Mysteries author. Welcome to the show. Yeah.
I feel. You know what? It's interesting because I feel super proud that I got to do that. Like, I've been playing D&D for almost over 2 decades, and I have always wanted to have my name in an official D&D book. And Candlekeep came out. Everyone was real jazzed about all the adventures there. And it's nice. It's nice. And then of course things in America kind of went shit.
So they did.
Yeah, so they did. But not to get things heavy. I feel proud that I was able to put something out like that. I feel proud that I was able to kind of show off my heritage and culture in that adventure. And then I also feel very proud that I was able to make some systematic changes to how the monk is presented in D&D.
And your podcast, Asians Represent, is Annie award winning.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Let's see.
Too.
Congrats.
It says here you record once a month. Is that allowed? Can you do that? You can only once a month.
We do. You know what? It's funny because we were doing twice a month.
Okay.
And then the pandemic hit, and then we took a break, and then we started streaming on Twitch.
Oh right.
And then now, I guess technically we stream 6 times a month on Twitch. So we do every Friday, and then the first Saturday and the third Saturday. Then we have the regular podcast that's audio only, and then we have our actual play, which is right now podcast only. So we have we cover a couple of different sort of areas of consumption.
Right.
I guess.
Right. You've got different content streams. You're diversified.
Yeah, different content streams. It's there are some things that are best done. I mean, you two know this. Right.
Recording
a podcast, and you have to edit, you have to put all this stuff out, and you got to get it out there, right? And there are some conversations that just kind of need to happen, naturally and in the moment, and being like, okay, let's schedule everyone for a recording session, and let me edit all the audio, and then let's put it on the stream. It just doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work well for certain topics, and so we kind of have our podcast, which is for our actual play. We also host the audio from some of our live readings on there, as well as just the special topics we talk about on the podcast. That's all there for people to consume, as they have been for almost 3 years. And then we added Twitch and YouTube as a way to be more visible, right? Because if you're listening to my voice, and you think what does an Asian person sound like? That's first of all, really stupid question, right? But second of all, if we're all about representation, a really important thing that we have to do is be visible. right, and be on video. And so that's why we kind of started doing Twitch and YouTube at the same time.
I heard you say this on your episode reflecting on Oriental Adventures, and that's awesome and absolutely true. And this isn't related at all, but I did not know Steve was jacked until I started watching your.
Steve's fucking jacked.
Anyway, I wish I'd known. I would love to have him on to talk to him about lifting. Because
you should. Get in touch with him.
I will, because the funny thing is, and this is not what you meant, but like I didn't have any idea what he looked like, and it was interesting and like valuable in a number of different ways to like see that. And I do think that you're absolutely right that being visible for somebody who's concerned about representation makes a big difference. So
huge difference. Yeah. And just to like, not only do we have a diversity in appearance, but we also have a diversity in voices, experiences, and everything like that. So it's super important for us to, not only, maintain that audio stream, but also have video.
Your podcast has spent, 20 hours now, maybe 18, deconstructing and going through Oriental Adventures and Kara-Tur.
40, actually.
40? Okay, sorry.
40 hours. It's 20 episodes.
Double it.
Yeah.
40
double it.
Yeah, I think it's 40 hours on Oriental Adventures, close to 50 on Legend of the Five Rings, 5th edition. And then right now we're about 20 into the Kara-Tur campaign setting. And I think about 20 on the Al-Qadim setting as well.
God damn.
Yeah, I know.
That's a lot. So obviously, I think it's impossible to pull everything that you've said on all of those shows together. But, Rob and I were talking, we're both lapsed academics and, really taking...
You've got a PhD, right?
I dropped out.
You dropped out.
Hell yeah.
I dropped
Dropout club.
We are all ABD.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
High five, guys.
Yeah, I defended my proposal. I got my ABD status. You know what? I actually dropped out after I submitted my thesis.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
You should always do it. Always drop out. It's okay to quit.
We might need to cut this but academia is so fucked, and
I think this is an important conversation. First of all, this is the first time that in the gaming space I've ran into like not one but two lapsed academics.
That's us. We're happy to talk about it because we did the whole thing and we both had our reasons, but it was not worth sticking it out. And
it's not unless you. Here's the thing. While I was doing my PhD, so I was doing it in Chinese archaeology.
Oh, awesome! Sorry, that
which
sounds
is
really
what
cool.
informs all of my game design stuff.
Right.
While I was doing it, I was seeing all of these other colleagues, and I had this one colleague. His name's Steve. Now he's Dr. Steve, and he was just single-minded focus on his research. Single-minded focus.
Right.
And I'm here doing research and doing cultural consulting on the side and podcasting, and I'm just like
having friends.
Yes,
having friends,
having a life, a social interaction,
not destroying my liver, and I was just like, this is a sign that this isn't for me. I also value my health and well-being.
I don't know if this happened to you, but every professor I had was like, "Hey, you're great at this. If you can do anything else with your life, you probably should." And they these were like I studied history. Matt and I both did, and I had many wonderful professors who were very smart, and their offices were tiny shoeboxes, and they had been associate professor for 20 years, and they either said that to me directly or indirectly, and I was like, maybe I can do something else, and that was the right choice.
I wish my committee had that conversation with me. Right, after I defended my proposal, they had me sit outside in the hallway and wait for 30 minutes, and I thought that I had failed. I was pulling out my hair. And then they came in and they were like, "No, we knew right away that you passed, but this is what happened to us.
Right.
So
You
we
had
had
to
to do that to
what?
you."
They made you wait. You
They
had
made
to
me wait.
Jesus.
Oh my god!
Because they had waited, and it was in that moment that I started down. It's not for me.
It's not for me.
It's not for me. This is so incredibly cruel. And then, for me, the tipping point was I actually submitted my dissertation, and this actually relates back to gaming. to play host.
I love it. No, this is beautiful.
Yeah. So like I had actually submitted my dissertation. I was on a team that had discovered an ancient culture in China. And I was the only.
Can you tell me? I'm so curious.
Yeah. So the culture, they were called the Shangshan culture, and they existed from about like 12,000 to about like 8,500 years ago.
Wow.
And they were like the first people to begin domesticating rice, and they were the first people in the world to make fine pottery. And I was the only, at least up until like 2019, I was the only person in the world studying their pottery. Which is
awesome.
Really cool, but also really sad at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. And I had submitted my dissertation, and I had another job doing a lot of media stuff at a museum that I was teaching at and doing my research at, and my committee never got back to me. And what ended up happening was one of my committee members lost my dissertation in digital format. And so this was like April, I submitted. He didn't get back to me despite my emails until September. And he was like, hey, can you send it to me again? And then another committee member, I can't even make this up, another committee member, he never got back to me, and he was so embarrassed and ashamed that he never got back to me that he just ghosted me. And I learned this from my primary supervisor. And that year, so I was like, I mean, I'm sure we all experience lows in our academic careers, right? That year, I went to Gen Con for the first time, and I went to Gen Con with a whole bunch of other like really cool people in the gaming space. One other designer, I don't know if you folks know Mark Richardson. He wrote a game called, oh god, he's my friend too. He wrote a game called Headspace. It's a Powered by the Apocalypse game, kind of inspired by Sense8, and he's a professional cartographer for the Canadian government, who then uses those skills for RPGs. He did all the maps for Seventh Sea and games like that.
Oh, right.
He's super cool. But anyways, we went to Gen Con and announced Asians Represent. And, you know, people were like really into it. And, you know, I started meeting a lot of people I connected with on the internet. And I was like, wait, I feel really happy.
Yeah.
And I literally came back and I took a year leave from school just because of what had happened. And after that leave, I was like, I had a full-time job. And I was like, I'm done. And that was it. But gaming really like got me started thinking that like there are other ways to apply this knowledge. There are other ways to apply these skills that will honestly earn me more money.
I think, you know, doing something that actually makes you happy is a good rule, you know, way to go. But also, I think you should never be in a job that occasionally requires you to dress up in weird costumes from the Middle Ages. So, and that's the academy. And you know, stay away from jobs that make you dress up in weird costumes. It's
Unless you want to.
Unless you want to. That's what you want. I wish I could say I were surprised.
Those people are messed up
by your story, Daniel, but that's pretty consistent with how I remember being treated in academia. I don't know about you, Matt, but professors
can be really great people. They should not be managers of employees.
They're not people managers,
and they don't know how to do it. Even the nicest ones.
Yeah,
and I think that's a knock not on them, nor is it a knock on the profession. I think it is a knock on the university/college system.
We love talking about structural problems on Dungeon Master of None.
Yeah.
This is a structural problem. Like, you know, the professors need support, and the system isn't built for. It's actually not built to help you do research or
research the things that you are interested in.
Exactly. Well, that's great. I'm glad we talked about this because
no, this is a bonding moment. This is that moment when all three of us connected.
That's
on
right.
A spiritual level.
Well, and I had a feeling that we were gonna get there, but it happened a lot faster than I thought.
Well, speaking of academics,
yeah.
right? Looking at Oriental adventures, Legend of the Five Rings, Kara-Tur, right? You know, you sort of apply the lens of Edward Said's Orientalism, and you know, just sort of some other techniques to try and deconstruct, I guess, what happened here. Like, why were these campaign settings and game systems written, you know, in this way that is so problematic, right? And at least salvage what is interesting about them and really take down what is bad and continues to harm kind of Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs.
Yeah, I think, it's crazy because we started the Oriental Adventure stream in that read on a whim. It was more of a joke to begin with. We were like, what if we decide to just read this book? And then people just started watching. And people really loved it.
At the beginning, it was almost like a MST3K read through.
Yeah, it was
of a movie. Like, oh, let's look at this.
Let's look at this funny bad thing
and make a joke.
Exactly.
which Matt and I have done, but it also sometimes goes off. Sometimes it becomes its a whole thing. Yeah,
And it became its own thing, and then it kind of blew up. And there was really positive honestly, it was very polarizing, the reception. Right, there were people who were like, yes, thank you for acknowledging this, thank you for, and I will say this, the series got more constructive. It started off as like, let's just shit on this thing, and then it became like, okay, people are watching, we have the responsibility to make sure that we do something constructive with this.
Right.
And so if you watch like the Kara-Tur streams now, the Al-Qadim streams, the L5R streams, like they are far more constructive. They also take us longer to do though. Like our latest Kara-Tur stream, we got like a page and a half into it. Because there's an actual city in Kara-Tur called Tsingtao, like the beer.
no, I didn't know that.
There's an actual city in Kara-Tur called Tsingtao, and guess what? They brew in that town.
Are you kidding me?
It's the one thing they're known for. That's a joke, everyone.
Funny joke. Gary
it's-
Gygax. Or wait, that one is Ed Greenwood.
This one's not Ed Greenwood.
Oh, it's not Ed Greenwood. Okay.
No. Did you know Ed lives in Canada?
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know how you feel about Ed Greenwood.
I knew that.
He's
That's
fine.
the one part of our material plane that El Minister has visited.
Okay, so I
Is
have.
that true?
I like Ed.
That's canon.
It's canon. He's been to Canada.
Yeah.
I like Ed actually. So funny story. So I used to sit on this panel with Ed once a year at a Canadian convention called Fan Expo. So once a year would be me, Ed Greenwood, and oh my God, one other person. It's very very long in a day. But I used to see Ed Greenwood once a year, and he would talk about his home game, and I was like, damn, I really would love to play in Ed Greenwood's home game. Because they literally sit together, and because they've been playing for so long, and Ed knows the world so well because he created it,
Right.
that they literally sit down and they're like, okay, what are we going to do today? And they're like, oh, remember that one adventure where we destroyed that bridge? Let's go fix it. And that's their adventure. And they just do it, and it's fantastic. I think Ed's a wonderful storyteller, and you know what? I think that Kara-Tur, which wasn't written by him, it was Mike Pondsmith. I looked it up. Jay Batista, Rick Swan, John Nephew, and Deborah Christian. It's certainly like a product of its time. There is like this like thirst for Asian content, but there was like the lack of internet, right? There wasn't any internet, and there wasn't, there weren't a lot of ways to connect with people with the expertise to write something like this.
Right.
Well, it was people even talking about this stuff. Like, I mean, we see this now in present day. Like, Asian people are seen as like secondhand citizens in many places, right? We're seeing attacks on Asian people, and in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when D&D was like kind of experiencing its rise and fall. This was also a time period when like Asian people were really looked down upon, right? And so I guarantee you that a lot of these people didn't think to actually hire an Asian person to write this stuff or consult Asian experts, just because of the way Asian people were portrayed in media, but also, given the fact that I'm sure the gaming space at the time was not the most welcoming to newcomers.
It's still sometimes not. So, I'm sure it didn't even occur to them. And it was the late '80s, so it was, high cyberpunk and a lot of fear about Japan and Asia's rise and all that, and both like a a fetishization of, and also a concern about. And yeah, it's not like a surprising document. And listening to your stream is really interesting because I started playing like well after these books were published, and I was aware of them, but I was also aware that they were not great, and so I haven't engaged with them very much. But what was actually in them was, I guess, worse than I anticipated. No, that's true. I'm curious. You said there was a polarizing reaction.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering, and I don't know if you know this, but I suspect that I know that there's a lot of new and younger fans of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games, and I wonder, probably they are not aware of these older properties. And was it like a generational difference? Like I know that the old guard doesn't like it when you highlight. Sometimes they don't like it when you highlight, how problematic these things are. But was it divided along those lines or some other way?
You know what? It's really interesting because I think that a lot of the pushback that we got was not from a particular like age demographic. We got a lot of pushback from people who, had this like extreme nostalgia for this. They were like, I played this as a kid, and I really enjoyed this, and this is what I started D&D in, and now you're calling it this. Does that mean you're calling me racist? And a lot of people were very reactionary in that. Then there were the people who were like, just don't read it, just don't play it. And I would say that like both are wrong, right? One of the things that we see a lot of in media surrounding Asian experiences and Asian stories and Asian themes is that our stories are not worthwhile. We are not meant to tell our stories. Yet the people who write about Asian culture are the people who also like love our food. But, they don't like us.
Right.
They love our weapons. All these mall ninjas with their katanas. Right? But they don't, respect us enough to listen to our own experiences. Right? And I think that's a huge problem in D&D right now. And, around that time of Oriental Adventures, we also discovered that, Wizards of the Coast was still actually profiting off of these things.
I remember that.
It's still canon, right?
And it's still
part of the Forgotten Realms.
And here's the thing. Like, if we're talking about Candlekeep as well, right? Like, when I wrote Candlekeep, I actually started writing Candlekeep before COVID. We got hired. I think we got approached late 2019. And then we started, contract signed, January 2020. Started writing. And I was like, the big challenge for me was, okay, I've played a D&D game that lasted, that took place in a world that I wrote for like almost 8 years. And I never really interacted a lot with the Forgotten Realms, right? And they were like, okay, it's got to be set in Candlekeep. I'm like, cool. I want to write like an Asian coded adventure, right? Now, me being Asian doesn't mean I have to write an Asian coded adventure because I can write anything, and because my experience is, not just that of my Asian culture. But I wanted to write an Asian coded adventure because I wanted to fix a couple things in the sort of how stories were told in D&D, and I'm sure we can get to that later. And when I started writing it, I actually remember writing about like, okay, have you both read the adventure, by the way?
Yes, we have.
Yes.
Okay, so I was like, hey, this book is from Kara-Tur. Bakme, the main villain, is from Kara-Tur, and that was in the book. And then we started reading, and I was like, fuck, no, this can't happen.
I was gonna bring this up later, but I noticed that
there is one, and it says he's a show character.
And then I think, what does it say? The book is from the far east of Faerun or something like that. But
yes.
you don't say Kara-Tur, and I noticed.
Yeah, and so like I had a wonderful editor. Shout out to Hannah Rose, and I was like, this was after all the pushback and everything. I was like, hey Hannah, I know you. She approached me and she was like, hey, I'm your editor. If you have anything you want me to look out for, let me know. And is it okay if I ask you questions? Because my editor was not Asian, right? And I was like, hey, remove all of Kara-Tur. Like anything that any word that I wrote about Kara-Tur, remove it. I compromised though, and I kept it that the character was show, right? And I mostly did that because I wanted to situate this within the Forgotten Realms, and B, I wanted to have an Asian coded character, and that's the way to do it in 5th edition. Right, China is the Shou Lung are Chinese.
Right.
So same with the Tu Lung, but I kept Shou in there because I was like, this is the compromise I'm going to make, and it took out Kara-Tur. I forgot how we got here, but yeah, it was a very, very interesting experience. Not only like calling out wizards on that while I was under contract writing this thing, reading it live, and then seeing both a positive and extreme negative reception to it. It also got to the point where I was getting harassed online by people. People would send me DMs telling me that I'm ruining D&D, calling me book burner. It was some crazy stuff.
Oh, I did see that when people were talking about taking down or stopping wizards from profiting off of and I was like,
and here's
it's
the
not
thing,
burning the book.
I wasn't asking to destroy it. I was saying, hey, wizards, you're profiting off of this. You can't go and talk about social justice and anti-racism, yet also profit off of stuff that is founded off of whether it was intentional or not, racist or exclusionary ideas of other people. And wizards asked me, they were like, hey, what can we do? And I was like, look, I'm not here to tell you to erase this from the internet, because I also think media erasure is a huge problem, and that would have been highly problematic. And I think that education is far more important. In a perfect world, Oriental Adventures exists on a website that is maintained by Wizards of the Coast, and it's an annotated volume that people can look through for free, and they can see exactly, what was written and why it might have been wrong, and what you can look to if you want to do better. That's my perfect world scenario. Because people need to learn from the past, right? If we just erase it and get rid of it entirely off of Drive-Thru RPG and DM's Guild, then nobody actually learns.
No, that's absolutely right.
We'll get the next role-playing game that does all the same tropes and has all the same problems.
Well, and that's what the problem when people get mad when you talk about it. Criticism does not mean that you want to eliminate something from existence. It's just criticism. And that there's actions that you can take, but you're absolutely right that by failing to engage with or learn from Kara-Tur, that nothing changes. Matt and I have been critical. We're actually frequently critical of both Wizards and third-party adventures. We reviewed one that took place in not Mesoamerica that was bad in a lot of ways, and we're not trying to destroy these things. We're not trying to eliminate them from the media landscape. It's just we just
want you to think about them.
Well, I saw you two did an episode on Lovecraft and Cthulhu.
We did, and we had a lot to say about Lovecraft.
Look, that dude was just so weird and so full of hate.
Well, and so if you listen to the episode, you'll hear. But the book has a really extensive section on Lovecraft and his life and the circumstances, and it does not mention his obvious and upfront racism. It just straight up just doesn't bring it up, which you can read Lovecraft and play in a Call of Cthulhu game, and you just kind of need to be aware of these things. And pretending like it's not an issue, that does not work for me. Yeah.
The one thing I saw that really, really frustrated me, and I would love to give you the opportunity to address this, Daniel, is one comment I saw when you were first doing your series on Oriental Adventures and then Kara-Tur, is sort of the thing that someone said, or lots of people were saying, so what? It's filled with stereotypes about Asian cultures, right? The Sword Coast and the other parts of the Forgotten Realms are filled with stereotypes about other regions
European
of
cultures.
the world. And it's just this fundamental unwillingness to recognize that, like, we live in a society. We live in a society. Man.
Live in a society.
We live in a society.
Like a society.
Maybe we
with,
shouldn't have been in academia to begin with.
No, we shouldn't have. That was
mistake.
actually
It was
my
a mistake.
entire dissertation. Is all I wrote was just we live in a society, and that's maybe why I left. And it's that we live in like these adventures are published in a world that has our world that has a history and a power differential and histories of racism and violence and yeah, there's a direction to these things, right? And so you can't just sort of say, like, your show does such a good job of breaking down why these things are problematic, right?
I mean, the big thing is that, like, just because we say this thing is problematic isn't saying that nothing else, everything else is free of that. And people are like, oh, well, what about this? This show's it's called Asians Represent, not white people represent. Right? We're not talking about, the European cultures that are clearly, drawn upon in this. Like, look, people have talked extensively about, let's talk about Ravenloft. Right? We talked a lot about the Romani and Ravenloft. And look, Wizards took some action to fix that. And I certainly hope the new Ravenloft book that's coming out is going to be better, because they are bringing in some of the most problematic Asian stuff back into Ravenloft. And I'm very curious to see what they did with it.
We talked extensively about the Vistani and Romani in our last episode because yeah,
and that's a clear example of another form of stereotype that is deeply ingrained in D&D, and requires attention, right? But saying that one aspect of D&D is problematic and maybe even racist isn't to say that the other things are. We are just using our platform and our voices to share our experience, and a lot of people use that as a defense, or to try to push back against us calling out, this problematic content.
Right.
By saying, look at this problematic content. Yeah, it's problematic.
It's also bad. Yeah,
It's also bad.
That is bad too. No, this is a thing that comes up a lot. Is it like, well, what about this thing? And I'm like, yeah, that sucks too. Like, that's, we're happy to talk about all, but you have your podcast focuses on the thing that is important to you, and the way that you want to see
that we could speak to as well.
Precisely. And so the existence of other things that are bad does not, somehow invalidate or, it's also not relevant, right? Because, like you keep saying, this is your experience and your perspective, and yeah, whether or not it's also insulting to white people does not, it's not white people represent.
That's not the show, because that's not my perspective or experience.
So.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. In the interest, I could do this all day. I get
Honestly,
worked,
me too.
I get worked up about this because Matt and I are always saying, like, we just want it to be better. Like, we want to play more interesting stories. We want to have better, like, representation of all people. We like D&D. We like playing in these settings, but, like, we just want them to be better. And so our criticism is meant from a place of love and, like, constructive, we were trying to improve this thing that we spend all of our time doing.
It's feed forward. That's how you do it. I mean, like, look, I think all three of us, and I haven't said this on a podcast because I don't think anybody would really get it, but, like, all three of us understand, like, the gaming industry and the pushback that, we saw, like, that is identical to academia.
Oh, yeah. Well,
identical.
It has similar problems, similar structures, small number of certain type of people in charge of everything,
in positions of power and positions of power over how knowledge is basically constructed.
Ooh, I like that, Daniel. That's very smart. I hadn't thought about it that way, but as the academic nerd, I really like that. I do want to ask you, and I will want to make sure that we get to Candlekeep. But you mentioned that you built your own world, or you ran a game in your own world. And one thing that I would love, and if I don't want you to have to do too much work on this if it's outside your what you're interested in, but I would love to hear, like, how you would encourage, or what your approach is to world building. Like, if, for example, some some white guys like us did want to include, non-Western or Eastern cultures, how would you approach it? I have a specific example. I ran a game for a long time that was set in, a fantasy Mongol empire. I love the time period, like right after the conquest, when it stretches from, Kiev and Rus all the way to Korea, and this interchange of cultures and ideas. And so I wanted to run a game in that. And I think I did okay. I think I did all right. I avoided stereotypes as best I could, and I, drew upon my knowledge of history, but I could probably do better. So, like, if somebody like me or was just trying to include any sort of Asian society or non-Western people, how would you tell them to approach that? And how do you approach it as somebody of, Asian descent?
Yeah, look, I'm not even an expert on everything Asian either, right? For me, a big part of it is doing the work, right? Mm-hmm. If you're using some pre-written material, give it a read through, right? See what people are saying online. If you're working from scratch, if you look that the Mongols are like a really interesting one because there is this fascination with them, not only from their like legendary martial prowess to the fact that they were these like semi-sedentary like peoples who just like went around and conquered shit, but also produced fine works of art.
We're excellent bureaucrats and administrators and but
that's the thing. You're already doing the thing that I would have said, and it's don't rely on
the
tropes and stereotypes, right? These cultures, and not just Asian cultures, but all cultures around the world are nuanced, right? And if you're looking at Asia and and this is the one we see, like I see this for Chinese and Japanese stuff all the time, especially for Japan. And it's, people say, okay, I want to, create a fantasy world that's going to be inspired by Japan. Well, Japan has a very, very long history. And people say, well, it's going to be Japan, samurai. And they make these generalizations about thousands of years of history. So, if you were going to do like, okay, let's stick to your Mongol one. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're going to do Mongols. Now, what time period, right? Because the Mongols just didn't exist in this one instance of really cool stuff. They did a lot of really neat stuff. Like, is it going to be when the Mongols invaded China and took over China? Is it going to be just during that period? Is it going to be when they were rapidly expanding all over, like, Eurasia? What is it going to be, right? So if you're, creating your own cultures, like, A, don't rely on stereotypes, and B, don't generalize an entire culture's thousands of years of history into one single thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's like saying, okay, everything fantasy Japan has to be samurai. Can't do that either, right? Or it's like everything fantasy China has to be Romance of the Three Kingdoms, right? Because
right.
From my expertise, like China went from like this interesting. So if you look at from like, let's say we were making a campaign setting based on like a D&D style campaign setting. I'm actually writing one right now. I have the document open on my monitor. And I'm working on one through my Patreon, patreon.com/Daniel Kwan. And it's called The Chronicles of Spring and Autumn. So I'm focusing on the Warring States period. So the Warring States period kind of took place during the late Bronze Age. And what I wanted to do was, create a system agnostic campaign setting inspired by this period of, political strife. Now, this particular period is very unique to China. It is one of the only periods in time where magic swords were talked about at length. And there were traditions of, naming swords, right? Legendary swords and legendary, like, sword masters. And that only actually comes from one province in China, Zhejiang province, and only for a couple hundred years. And so my challenge was, okay, well, I don't want to take any generalizations, like cultural generalizations from other aspects of China's history. I want to focus on just this. And so I've been doing a lot of academic research on the Yue state during this particular period. And for the most part, and I've been challenging myself to do this, everything that I've written is inspired by this one particular period where there were maybe like 8 generations of leaders, and that's it, right? Like prior to this, China was very much like in the early Bronze Age. China was just all about ancestor worship and throwing these dope feasts so you could show everybody how powerful you are, and literally harnessing like the spirits of your dead ancestors. Like that from a D&D perspective is super compelling as a setting, right? Then you go into later Chinese history where you have like Taoism and Buddhism, right? And then of course you have like interactions like with the West. But this is over several thousands of years of history. And you can't really boil that all down into a single setting, at least not very easily. So when you're doing the work, you, again, avoid stereotypes, avoid generalizations of entire cultures, but also just like look around, do some research. And two of you coming from a history background understand this more than most people, right? History is certainly not perfect or objective. Right? Consider what you're reading and who wrote the history that you're looking at, right? Think about, if I'm gonna do something on, Chinese based on China's history, well, maybe don't read a history book that is based on the research of a white British dude who went to China.
Well, wait a second. In front of me, I've got Niall Ferguson and Bernard Lewis.
This is the joke I was going to make.
So I'm ready to go.
Exactly,
oh, shit.
right?
Not those guys.
Yeah, so like think about like maybe I'll find the works of a Chinese scholar who have been translated to English, right? Likewise with Japan. Think about how there's a big example is like everyone's preoccupation with Bushido. Right, when you talk about samurai, but like Bushido is a relatively like modern concept that was really talked about in like the early 20th century and imprinted upon the past, and these dogmatic concepts of like honor, life, death, and martial skill. But the way the West perceives the East very much informs the history books that are written. And then as people engage in less than diligent research, they continue to perpetuate these ideas. So it's more than saying go read a book. It's go read a book, go to a museum, and then think about who's producing that knowledge. That is the next step that people miss all the time. That got
hell
heavy.
yeah. Well,
no, that was exactly what I was looking for. That was very, very useful. A lot of our listeners are dungeon masters. A lot of them do their own world building, and so I was excited to have you on to talk about this.
It's the thing I love most. I don't care about stat blocks or anything like that. I just like culture.
And speaking of culture and maybe some really good world building, you are, and we know you can't talk too much about it, but working on one of our favorite settings based on its world building, Avatar: The Last Airbender.
We can cut this if you're not allowed to say anything about it. But
if you're not allowed to say anything, we will.
We don't have to cut anything because I know the it's good to have a podcast that has like a flow to the discussion. No. I can't talk too much about it.
But we are super excited that it's happening.
Me too. What I can say is that the design team and the people consulting are primarily Asian, and I think it's really great. And I think what's also great is that we have people of different Asian backgrounds too, right? When you look to the world of Avatar, it's like it's not just China, it's not just Japan. It's really, really interesting, and I think Avatar's a really good example of world building done by non-Asian people that can be respectful, and character writing that can subvert tropes, right? Like Zuko is a really interesting one. Like if you look at Zuko, he's just like all about his honor, and for many characters in like Oriental Adventures and Kara-Tur, that's kind of where they end. But Zuko is like this redemption arc that's just so great. Or even if you look at like Iroh. Iroh's another character who's just like, of course,
my heart, Uncle Iroh. Like he's just like
Iroh's great.
He's
right?
who I aspire to be. Yeah, but like
right. He's wise, but also like very self-aware. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think what's also cool about Avatar, and especially Legend of Korra, because I think they did a really interesting thing with that series in that they had to kind of handle the Industrial Revolution, but also like a martial arts show. So, then they got to, dive into tropes about like how I think first of all, I think it was really neat how they showed like crime and discrimination amongst like all the different benders. I thought that was really neat, and they were telling really compelling stories there, and they were hitting on like these like noir tropes now, but with Asian characters or characters that were coded to be Asian, right? We saw characters who were atypical in in how Asian characters are depicted. Because think about like Mako and Bolin, right? I see them as Asian characters, but how many times in media do you see Asian characters who start off as like professional athletes, like pro benders? You don't see that because like Asian characters, what do they do, right? You see them as like doctors, engineers,
Right. Well, they treat them like they're people. They have
They are people.
complex motivations and stories and character arcs, and that's the thing that I like about Avatar that I think makes it seem respectful, is that everybody's a fully realized human being.
I think about like Asami Sato, a really great character. She could have just been this like wealthy heiress, but no, she's like fully capable character. She's not even a bender, and she holds her own with everyone else. She's a strong, independent character who and gets what she wants, and I think that's wonderful. And you don't see that a lot. Oftentimes, you see characters, especially Asian women, who are like fetishized and viewed as like objects, especially in D&D, and it shouldn't be like that. And so like one of the things that I think TTRPGs needs more of is just depictions of nuanced Asian characters, and that's what I was kind of going for with Book of Inner Alchemy and Candlekeep.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. I think
I'll
that's,
get a segue in.
I think that's good. I was thinking about how to get us there.
This is one of, it's got to be one of my favorite adventures in this book, which we've already said is super great. Candlekeep Mysteries. It's for 12th level characters, and I don't know. Tell us about the sort of design and writing process. What really inspired you when you got the contract to write this adventure?
Yeah, you know what? I was at the time when I got the contract, and they were like, "We want you to write something. We want you to write a high-level adventure," and I was like, "Ooh, okay, cool. Write a high-level adventure." At the time, I was, like I kind of go through phases where I like to, watch certain movies or things like that. Like right now, for me, it's vampires, and at the time, I was watching a lot of kung fu movies, and I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna try to make a kung fu movie," and I have an opportunity here to do one because if I want to show strong Asian characters, this has got to be in a high level adventure, right? If I just make these sort of like martial arts characters and it's like a first level adventure, well, characters are just going to like breeze through them, and it's not going to feel interesting, and they're not going to feel strong and powerful, and you're not going to build a connection to them. And so a couple of things I wanted to do with Candlekeep. I clearly wanted to do an Asian coded adventure. I wanted to lean in on the tropes of martial arts cinema that I grew up watching, movies from the 70s and 80s. I wanted that. B, if I was going to do martial arts, I was going to address chi or key points and how that was used in D&D. I wanted to change that. And so, I just wanted to have really cool, interesting characters that players might want to revisit in other adventures that are not Candlekeep. And as like the byproduct of that, I wanted to make the monk feel powerful. And the item that you can create at the end of the Book of Inner Alchemy makes monks really, really powerful.
Holy shit! It's such a cool item.
It's such a cool item.
Honestly,
It's an adventure or maybe a campaign that you've given us at the end of this module, which is super cool.
Yeah.
And if you
Gloves
make
of soul snatching.
If you make those gloves, like if you
Soul
compare
catching,
those gloves to any other magic item, it's not that powerful. But in the hands of a monk, it's honestly kind of OP. I feel it's really overpowered. Like combine that with like flurry of blows, and you were tanking damage and constantly healing.
Well, let's give the people what they want and go to a tangent about mechanics then. What are we also, we love world building, but how do you we've talked a lot about the way the 5th edition classes work. So, you mentioned that you wanted to sort of tweak or fix the monk. So,
yeah.
What are your thoughts on the monk as it exists? Because we have some quibbles with its power level and its what it is capable of.
Description: the magic of ki.
I think that the monk starts off really powerful. It's you get 2 attacks at level 1. You have a fairly high damage output. I mean, other classes with 2-weapon fighting can do a lot of damage. But I think the monk is fairly good at level 1. And then just gets really, really weak as other classes start to get really powerful magical items, spells, and abilities like that. And I say this, assuming that you're the kind of gamer who will follow the rules. Combat is very tactical, and you're not taking narrative liberties. One of the things that I also thought was a little strange about the monk is also how you become a monk, right? So you could start off as a monk, and you've got you eventually get key points, and you get these powers that go with it. But what if you're playing another character, and then you want to multi-class into a monk? What does that mean from a story perspective, right? Now, one, that could be like, well, how do you get that knowledge? Well, let's do a whole adventure where we go seek out these kung fu masters, right? But also, if I'm a paladin and I have this power, like, let's say, lay on hands or the ability to, divine smite or anything like that, how do I rationalize having these powers and then getting these, kung fu powers, basically, right? How do I rationalize that? And D&D doesn't do a good job of that. Right now, the monk kind of exists as a trope on its own. It is the mystical Asian martial artist trope, right? So one of the things I wanted to do, and I have Inner Alchemy open on my computer, and, it says, one of the things I wanted to write, and honestly, if the rest of the adventure sucked, I would have just been happy with these, 3 points that I put in there. And it's under the subsection Inner Alchemy, and it says the characters who read the Book of Inner Alchemy learn the following information about ki or chi. And basically it's it's tied to the element of air and breath and one's body, and it's in everything, right? But I also wrote that medical techniques and training can be used to control the flow of it. So that means that every living being has this inside of them. Right? So now if you're a monk and you are interacting with other characters who have powers, or another character, like say this paladin, is going to try to multiclass into a monk, well, perhaps their divine power is really their own cultural interpretation of what the monks call ki or chi. Right? And that's something I really wanted. I wanted to make sure that if you were, multiclassing from a monk or to a monk, you would have a means of providing an understanding to the players at your table and your GM, how that made sense, right? Because the same thing, we see this in history, right? Different cultures interpreted different phenomena, right, in their own unique ways. And that's the same thing with chi and magic.
Well done. You've stealth retconned how chi works in the Forgotten Realms canon and in D&D in general into this
kudos
amazing adventure.
Kudos to Wizards of the Coast, because they were, there was no pushback on.
They were chill with that. That's good.
They were super chill with it. They honestly they were like, how can we help? They also Chris Perkins emailed me and was like, hey, the art. He was like, do they look Asian enough? And I was like, first of all, thank you for asking.
Art is good, by the way.
I love it.
You said you wanted to create a martial arts film, and in my opinion, you succeeded. I immediately knew what was happening here, and I love it. I want to also give you some direct praise for the fight in the Steely Forest with Steel Crane, with all the different pillars, for 2 reasons. One, because it's awesome, but also using terrain for combat to make combat encounters more interesting is both so exciting and hard to do. in Dungeons and Dragons is one of the things that I spend a lot of time on as a DM, trying to find ways to make the environment interesting. And this is such a classic, and also like a great way, like within the game, to make it challenging. I was a huge fan of this.
Yeah, because like you know what, like you watch martial arts movies and choreographers are just like, they are so creative with how the characters interact with the environment. And I mean, like, Jackie Chan is 100% one of the best at this. You know, the way he kind of, each fight scene is set up and how he uses the environment around him is just, it makes everything so much more interesting than like, let's sit on this grid and there are trees all around us and there you go. Right now you have acrobatic combat, you have options for stealth for both, you know, the enemies and the players.
You have a third dimension. Yeah, you have up and down as well as, you know.
Exactly. And you're a high enough level that you're going to be just like rolling these checks and succeeding over and over again.
The villains of this are also super great. They have a temple, the Order of the Mortal Lotus, hidden in the forest, not too far from Candlekeep, and an evil monk master, Bak Mei. Talk about creating the Order of the Immortal Lotus, which, again, this is such a short adventure, but it's like, oh, this faction is one that I want in my campaign.
I'm probably going to steal the faction and work it in.
Yeah, that's my approach to like TTRPGs in general. It's like, if you don't want to play through my adventure, but you really like some things that are in it, I'm just as happy with that. Like, take which one. If you like Bak Mei, if you think he's like an interesting character, because like in my mind, like he's not just like this like dope villain who's like quite powerful, but he's also like an interesting character because like at the end of the adventure, maybe you don't kill him, maybe you follow him, maybe you learn from him. He's like, hey, can I teach me your ways? Let me join you. Are things in show, you know, why did you leave, right? Why are you on this path to redemption, or are you traveling down this, you know, tainted path because of your thirst for knowledge, right? There is a lot that you could do with them. You know, with writing Bak Mei, you know, Bak Mei was a person historically, right? You see him in a lot of movies as Pai Mei, like in Kill Bill, but I kind of based him on Bak Mei's depiction in Executioners from Shaolin and Clan of the White Lotus, which are both fantastic movies, and they say that he betrayed the Shaolin to the government and all of that. And so I wanted this character who was a traitor, who was seeking knowledge, but I wanted to leave his intentions a little bit vague for the players to kind of fill in, or the GM to kind of fill in, right? I wanted to have a villain who could then turn into a mentor, right? Because if you know, we mentioned Avatar: The Last Airbender, what's really cool about Avatar is that even though the Avatar can wield all of the elements, you know, Korra and Aang both go on these journeys of self-discovery. They're constantly learning. They're finding people to teach them new techniques. And same with their companions too, right? And I wanted Bak Mei to be this character that they ultimately encounter and could become, you know, an NPC that, you know, you use for your next adventure, right? Hey, maybe Candlekeep is bad. Maybe Candlekeep is like, maybe they're just, if you read the book, it's getting into Candlekeep alone is a task and a half for the players. And maybe, you know, the folks at Candlekeep shouldn't be hoarding all of this knowledge. And maybe, you know, Bak Mei and his order of, you know, monks who go and steal lore and steal knowledge are doing something right in their own twisted way. And maybe you talk to Bak Mei and you say, hey, look, yeah, you know, stealing knowledge for this personal gain maybe isn't the best thing. But what if we like undermine all of Candlekeep and we share this knowledge and we spread it around the world? And now you have this whole campaign where you're trying to destroy Candlekeep and what it stands for.
What if Candlekeep, but copying was allowed?
Right.
Exactly.
Right. What if
let us copy it? Come on.
One silver piece for a page, and you just like,
Yeah. Yeah, no, this and we approach things the same way, and we like to we always encourage our listeners to pick and choose and to take the parts that they like and adapt them. That's also why we love Candlekeep Mysteries. Is there's so much to borrow, and it's segmented in such a way that you can take monsters, you can take items, you can take little bits, you can take whole adventures and just plug them in, and there's just there's a lot of cool stuff here. I think
it's also a great way to just learn from different people.
Yes.
Right? I think it's so easy to be like, okay, well, Storm King's Thunder, this big ass book, and we're gonna play through the whole thing. First of all, I don't have time for that.
Who's got time for that?
Do you have a
But
year?
you know, I have time for a 1 or 2 shot, and every now and then we can play a 1 or 2 shot and learn from different people, right? Like Kiana Shaw, who also has an adventure in Candlekeep, wrote an adventure that's basically the Truman Show, but in D&D, and it's awesome. So what I think is really neat is that Kiana and I are both Asian, and we wrote 2 very, very different adventures. So not only do you get some diversity in the story that you're telling, but you're also learning from creators who have maybe it's the same cultural background, but have vastly different life experiences with that culture and how they express that.
Oh, yes, I had a follow-up question. Speaking of learning from other authors and other voices, we also encourage our dungeon masters to learn from other systems. You've designed a whole other role-playing game system, or using rules from Powered by the Apocalypse with Ross Rifles.
Yeah.
A game about Canadian soldiers during the First World War. And since most of our listeners primarily play Dungeons & Dragons, but I encourage them to check out Ross Rifles, what is really working in a setting and a game system and creating this outside of Dungeons & Dragons really teach you about dungeon mastering?
Oh, really? Yeah. Great question.
Yeah.
Ross Rivals was the first game I ever put out. First big game that I ever put out. It was me and my 2 other buddies. We started a company. We both worked at the Royal Ontario Museum in education, and so we had access to so much knowledge. Ross Rivals is both a history book and a game book. I would say 2/3 of that book are just our history. I wrote a whole section on World War I slang, a whole section on German weapons, Canadian weapons, but also we wrote about the different kinds of people who fought in World War I, the Chinese people, the Japanese people who fought in World War I, the Black Canadians who fought in World War I, right? Telling these stories that you might not see in the history books, or at least the history books that you interact with at school. So with Ross Rifles, we wanted to make a Powered by the Apocalypse game that was tragic and violent, but also a game about lesser known history and telling a story without the pressure of feeling like you have to change history. We all know what happened in World War I, and we know that World War I was horrific. And a lot of RPGs like Savage Worlds, they kind of tend towards the weird War I. They're like, the horrors of the trenches were the supernatural. No. The humanity is capable of very bad things, right? As we've seen throughout history.
You don't need to hop on a Zeppelin and zap something with a Tesla coil to tell a story about World War I.
You don't. And here's the thing. You also can tell whatever story you want without having to worry about historical accuracy, because there are so many little stories. And the actions that you take in the trenches may ultimately have no effect on the outcome of the war. But they will have an effect on your character's experiences on the Western Front and how they come out of that. And I think that's what's most important. So for a GM, it's hey, sometimes it's really nice to focus on the meta plot, what's happening in the world. But you also need to think about what's just happening to your party, right? What's happening to that little town that they might have helped? What's happening to the character who, is, whose backstory the group is currently focusing on? And really just think about individual characters and the impact that they have on individual NPCs. And that, small-scale stories are just as powerful as large-scale campaigns.
Reading through Ross Rifles, it was a reminder to me as a dungeon master that a lot of what can make a D&D campaign, every game is different, and that's fine. But a lot of what can make a Dungeons & Dragons campaign really successful is really taking the time to let your characters breathe, right? It's like the next generation, right? In the first like couple seasons, every episode is about the like supernatural phenomenon in the mystery, and we don't get to know the characters. But once you like slow down and give your characters time to develop and interact with each other, then it gets really good, and the overall plots become even more interesting and meaningful. And a game like Ross Rivals is a great teaching way, a way to teach you how to do that.
Yeah, you know what? I'm a big fan of the sort of slow burn in an adventure. Anyways, I'm having written Candlekeep Mysteries. I'm also like the one shot or the two shot is not my preferred style of play. I really like the slow burn. I like to, we have this actual play called Dungeons and Asians, and it is, here's the thing. We also just put out episodes when we feel like it. We try to do it monthly, but we have to take into account the fact that we're living during a pandemic. We've had episodes where we've rolled no dice, and they've been just as great as the episodes where we're just like constantly rolling dice for combat. And I think, in exploring other games and exploring other game systems, I think the thing to learn is that, there is more than one way to tell a story, right? And the D&D 5e rule sets are really good for telling one kind of story. And that I would encourage DMs to look for things in other systems that might enhance your game. I'm not saying don't play D&D. I'm saying just look to see how, you might be able to make your D&D better. For instance, I don't like the way XP works in D&D because I think it makes characters, especially if you're going by the numbers, I think it makes the gameplay very combat-oriented in a way that's not narratively interesting. Combat is cool, but if you're like, okay, we're this short XP and we need to let's go find something to kill so we can level up. I hate that. What I really like is how other games like Free League, they made Coriolis, Tales from the Loop, Mutant Year Zero, they do XP on a session base. So at the end of the session, you earn XP based on how you've interacted with other people at the table. Did you participate? Did you do something risky? Did you put another NPC in danger? Did you sacrifice something for a character that you have a close bond with? Like, that stuff isn't in D&D.
Burning Wheel has a similar system where everybody gets together and they discuss, did you accomplish these things? How did you interact with each other? Who took the biggest risks, and who,
Exactly.
And it takes a little time at the end, but it's cool. It's a lot of fun.
It's worthwhile. And look, if you don't want to play Burning Wheel and you don't want to play Coriolis, but you still want to play D&D, I encourage you to take those things and use them in D&D.
Yeah, that's a thing that we're always saying is, and I like 5th edition a lot, but it is the whole book, not and is very combat oriented, and the way that systems impact storytelling is significant, and it makes a difference, and you can work against it, but that takes experience and time, and you have to be deliberate, because if you're just sort of doing what the book encourages you to do, you're frankly going to end up in a pretty combat heavy and maybe frenetic adventure where you don't have a chance to, like we said, stop and breathe and let your characters grow, because though you can absolutely do that in Dungeons and Dragons, it's not really encouraged by rules as written. Daniel, we could talk to you all day.
This has been a lot of fun.
I want to be respectful of your time. So we'll have to have you back. I want to ask you about like 1,000 things, specifically building a setting agnostic system. That's something I'm also interested in. I'm very curious about it. So we may have you back and talk about that at some point. But anything else that?
Yeah, let us know when. Let's see. It was the Book of Autumn and Spring.
Chronicles of Spring and Autumn.
Chronicles of Spring and Autumn. When that's getting a little more cooked, we would love to have you back on to talk about it.
3 previews.
Okay.
Of it, on my itch.io store. It's danielhkwan.itch.io. The first two are like little monster zines. They were experimental, called Denizens of Mountains and Seas, and it's kind of, they've got short little essays on, different monsters and how you can use them in your games. And then I released one called Blades of the Lunar Kingdom, which is kind of a short, like 8-page zine on magic swords in China and different Chinese blades. So those like 2 previews kind of give you a sense of what it is.
Awesome.
Hell yeah.
Anything else? Yeah, that we didn't cover. Anything that final thoughts for us? You talked about a lot of things, but yeah.
Yeah, you know what? Like, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the conversation. Look, it's always good to connect with people who have gone through that sort of academic combine and have come out stronger.
Well, and it's a pandemic. I know that you go to cons, so maybe someday in the future we can meet up in person and swap war stories over beers or something. Whenever that is like possible.
Look,
again.
I'm always happy. You two are cool. Let's stay in touch. Always happy to come on.
Matt, Daniel said we're cool.
Guess I wrote that down in my notes. Daniel said cool.
Yeah, no, I had a blast. I thank you for giving me space to talk about these things. I think it's also important to I've been on podcasts where everybody just talks at me and I'm just like, why am I here?
Well, and speaking of podcasts, if you're not listening to Asians Represented, you should be.
You should be. It's good, especially
link in the show notes.
I'm a huge fan of the Kara-Tur ones that I'm following along, and our listeners I think will find them especially interesting because you have a lot of. It's funny, and there's also like a lot of like interesting and useful advice there about both about world building and like what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, we've got something for everybody. If you like actual play, we've got some of that. If you like long form discussion, we've got that too. We're actually putting out a new episode soon, and it's kind of reflecting on our on our Legend of the Five Rings read through. So you listen to the Oriental Adventures sort of post mortem. We just recorded one for L5R as well.
Awesome.
So we're putting that out. If you're looking for just like entertainment, if you're looking for a talk show with Asian people, we've got the wrap up on Twitch. If you're looking for if you're really into D&D lore, well, we've got Kara-Tur and Al-Qadim. Something for everybody.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. We'll hopefully talk again soon. We'll put all of your various projects in the show notes. And thank you so much for being awesome. Looking forward to what comes next. Listeners, please check out all this stuff. Stay healthy, stay safe, get vaccinated, and keep rolling them dice.
Heck yeah.